In the quiet upper-middle-class suburb of North Attleboro, Massachusetts, a place where cul-de-sacs loop around manicured lawns and neighbors wave politely from driveways, a mansion once sat at the center of a storm no one saw coming. At first glance, it looked ordinary, another large New England home built for families chasing comfort and stability. But behind its stone facade and wide front yard, this house would become the setting for one of the most unsettling chapters in modern sports history. When Aaron Hernandez first walked its halls, he was only 22, a newly signed tight end for the New England Patriots, still riding the high of a breakout NFL season and still trying to outrun the shadows of a turbulent childhood. The house, tucked away on a quiet road, represented what he felt he finally deserved: space, peace, a clean slate, a structure big enough to contain the growing life of a rising star, and perhaps the ghosts he tried to keep at bay. The estate wasn't chosen by accident. It was far from the press, yet close enough to Gillette Stadium for a fast commute. The neighborhood was safe, predictable, almost painfully normal. To the outside world, Hernandez was settling down, building stability with his fiancée, Cheyenne Jenkins, and growing a life rooted in success rather than survival. In those early months, the house symbolized arrival, the reward for years of talent, discipline, and grit. But from the beginning, there were warning signs, the kind of subtle ripples that only make sense in hindsight. The mansion, though large and luxurious, seemed strangely empty, its rooms filled more with potential than with comfort. Hernandez, restless and impulsive, struggled with stillness. He had brought his past with him: friends from old neighborhoods, unspoken rivalries, unresolved paranoia. And slowly the house that was meant to shelter him began to absorb those tensions. Neighbors remembered the day he moved in, a young athlete with fame at his feet and a future wide open. No one could have imagined that within the walls of that same mansion, a very different story was beginning, a darker one, shaped by secrecy, pressure, and the decisions that would eventually bring everything crashing down. When Aaron Hernandez and his fiancée Cheyenne Jenkins began searching for a home, they were looking for more than square footage. They wanted a sanctuary, a place removed from the noise, far from Hernandez's old Connecticut neighborhoods where grudges lingered and old associations felt impossible to fully escape. North Attleboro offered what they believed they needed: privacy, anonymity, and a clean slice of New England calm. The mansion itself, with its sprawling layout and quiet surroundings, seemed perfect. It offered over 5,000 square feet, a large yard, tall hedges, and enough distance from neighbors to keep prying eyes at bay. For Hernandez, that isolation was ideal. To Cheyenne, it was a home to raise their young daughter, a place stable enough to support the family she believed they were building. But there was another layer to the choice, one that Hernandez never said out loud. Fame had come fast, almost too fast, and with it came a fear he could never quite shake. Old rivalries, people he didn't trust, a feeling that danger was never far behind. The mansion, removed from busy streets and outside the radius of constant attention, gave him space where he could control who entered, who left, and who saw what happened inside. The Patriots facility was only a short drive away, making it ideal for the life he envisioned: football, home, family. A tight orbit, a predictable routine. Still, the decision carried an unusual intensity. Hernandez toured the house more than once. He walked the perimeter, tested the sight lines from the windows, asked about privacy, locks, cameras. He was a 22-year-old man suddenly behaving like someone twice his age, someone who felt the world might turn on him at any moment. To Cheyenne, these were quirks. To Hernandez, they were necessities. Inside, the mansion had more than enough room for a young couple starting a life, but it also had pockets of seclusion: basement spaces, unused rooms, corners where silence pooled, places where distractions could hide, places where secrets could grow. Looking back, the decision to buy this house wasn't just about comfort. It was about control, about creating a world where Hernandez believed he could finally be safe, even if that safety was an illusion. In the months after the purchase, the mansion began to change, slowly at first, then dramatically. Hernandez wasn't content to simply live in the house as it was. He wanted to shape it, to bend it into something that matched the life he pictured for himself. Part family home, part clubhouse, part fortress. Contractors recalled that he moved quickly, requesting upgrades before he had even settled in. The backyard was expanded, the patio retiled, the landscaping reworked to create taller, denser barriers from the street. He added high-end furnishings, new electronics, and eventually a home gym. But these changes weren't just about luxury. They were about building a self-contained world, one he wouldn't need to leave unless he wanted to. At the center of the transformation was the basement. It evolved into a private domain, a place for late-night hangouts, gaming sessions, and hours-long parties with friends from his old neighborhood. Heavy sound systems were installed, walls repainted, furniture swapped out for oversized couches and dim lighting. Down there, the house felt less like a New England family home and more like a sealed-off bunker, a space designed to keep outsiders away and insiders close. Security became another priority. Hernandez took unusual interest in surveillance, installing cameras around the exterior and near the garage. But what stood out to people who visited was not the technology itself, but the feeling behind it. As if Hernandez believed threats lingered everywhere, that safety needed constant reinforcement. Even when nothing seemed wrong, he moved like someone expecting something bad to happen. The property's transformation reflected two competing lives: the NFL star building a future, and the young man still anchored to old loyalties, old fears, and old habits. What began as a dream home slowly became a controlled environment shaped by the tension between who Hernandez wanted to be and who he couldn't stop being. As the mansion grew more insulated, so did its owner. The house expanded, but Hernandez's world shrank, room by room, decision by decision, wall by wall. And inside those reinforced spaces, the pressure that followed him began to settle like dust. From the outside, the mansion appeared calm, a young family's home marked by routine, morning drives to the Patriots facility, quiet evenings, the occasional gathering on weekends. But behind the front door, daily life inside Hernandez's estate was far from peaceful. It was a world split in two, shifting depending on who was present and what mood he carried home with him. During the day, Cheyenne tried to create normalcy. She decorated the nursery, organized the kitchen, and carved stability out of a life that seemed constantly in motion. Friends remembered her trying to host small get-togethers, hoping to build a life of ordinary comforts: dinners, movie nights, family visits. For brief stretches, the mansion felt warm, lived in, almost typical. But as evening fell, the atmosphere often changed. Hernandez's friends from Bristol and other neighborhoods showed up without notice. Sometimes one or two, sometimes entire groups. Loud music filled the basement. Smoke drifted up the stairs. Nights blurred into mornings. The house became an overnight hub where people stayed for hours or days, sleeping on couches, drifting in and out as if the mansion were a revolving door. Hernandez's moods followed no pattern. Some nights he was relaxed, joking, playing pool or video games. Other nights he was withdrawn, pacing rooms, checking windows, replaying conversations he thought hid threats or betrayals. Visitors noticed his paranoia, the way he watched the driveway, the way he double-checked doors, the way he snapped from calm to tense with no warning. Phones were sometimes taken away or set aside, and conversations stopped when certain people walked in. Basement parties went silent the moment Hernandez sensed a problem. The mansion was becoming a place where people monitored their words, their movements, and most importantly, their loyalty. Cheyenne lived in a strange middle ground. She was devoted but exhausted, managing the household while navigating Hernandez's unpredictable circles. One part of the house held their daughter's toys, another held secret arguments, whispered suspicions, and late-night confrontations. Everyday life became a balancing act. Smiles for neighbors, quiet routines for their daughter. And beneath it all, the growing tension of a home that could shift from peaceful to volatile at any moment. Inside those walls, nothing stayed calm for long. As Aaron Hernandez's career accelerated, so did the pressure inside the mansion. The house that once symbolized success began to feel like a container for mounting stress, a place where anxiety settled into each room, where silence carried tension, and where Hernandez's inner struggle grew harder to hide. On the field, he was a rising force. Off it, he was unraveling. Injuries piled up. Headlines scrutinized his every move. The Patriots' expectations weighed heavily, and beneath all of that, a storm of personal demons churned. Trauma from his childhood, distrust of people around him, and a deep paranoia that seemed to tighten its grip with every passing week. Inside the mansion, these pressures took shape in small, troubling ways. Hernandez grew more suspicious of visitors. He questioned friends' loyalty. He told people he felt watched. Even routine noises, a car passing at night but branches tapping a window, could send him pacing the hallways. His fiancée noticed the shift, but explanations were thin and tensions thickened every time she pressed for clarity. The basement, once his social refuge, became darker, literally and figuratively. Lights stayed low, curtains were drawn. Hernandez often retreated there alone, sitting in silence or replaying grainy security footage of the driveway. The house, designed to give him peace, now amplified his fear. Meanwhile, relationships inside the home were straining. Arguments with Cheyenne grew more frequent. She questioned his late-night outings, the rotating door of visitors, the unpredictability in his behavior. He countered with defensiveness, secrecy, and excuses. The mansion felt divided. Upstairs, a young family trying to build a future. Downstairs, a gathering place for old ties that refused to loosen. What no one realized at the time was how closely the house mirrored Hernandez's inner world. Behind its clean lines and suburban quiet, cracks were forming. Invisible at first, then undeniable. Hernandez was spiraling, slipping deeper into distrust, deeper into old patterns, deeper into the mental battle he tried desperately to hide. The warning signs were everywhere, but inside that mansion, where fear lived room to room, they became part of the daily background noise. The final months inside the North Attleboro mansion marked the point where tension inside the home was no longer something that simmered quietly in corners. It had become the defining atmosphere of the entire estate. By the time investigators would one day enter its rooms, the house had already absorbed years of stress, secrets, and choices that would ultimately seal Hernandez's fate. In the weeks leading up to the murder of Odin Lloyd, Hernandez moved through the mansion like a man who sensed something coming. He was restless, sleeping irregularly, pacing at odd hours, checking the surveillance system repeatedly. Friends noticed that he shut down conversations more quickly. He looked over his shoulder more often. His paranoia, once sporadic, had become constant. The mansion itself reflected this shift. Security cameras were monitored obsessively, yet Hernandez also disabled some of them, a contradiction that puzzled people around him. He wanted to see everything, yet he also wanted nothing recorded. One camera feed went dark without explanation. Others captured only fragments of movement. The basement, now a core part of the investigation's timeline, had become a place where Hernandez operated with caution, quiet intensity, and careful control. On the night prosecutors would later reconstruct in court, the mansion played an unintentional role, a silent witness. Car doors opening and closing outside, Hernandez moving through rooms with purpose. Phones left behind, lights flicking on, then off. Movements partially captured on broken surveillance lines. The home that once represented safety now held pieces of a story he could no longer contain. When Hernandez returned to the mansion in the early hours after Lloyd's death, investigators would later note his behavior. Calm at moments, agitated at others, whispering instructions, locking certain areas, and checking windows as if expecting someone to appear at any second. The walls that had once surrounded a promising young player now enclosed the aftermath of a decision that spiraled far beyond his control. In those last days before his arrest, Hernandez drifted through the mansion like a ghost in his own home. Present, but already somewhere else mentally, pacing the halls of a life closing in on him. The silence inside the house had changed. It was no longer the quiet of peace, but the quiet before collapse. When law enforcement finally arrived at the mansion with a search warrant, the quiet suburban home that once symbolized Aaron Hernandez's ascent became the epicenter of a national spectacle. Police cars lined the street. Neighbors stood behind blinds, watching the surreal scene unfold as investigators streamed into the very house they had once passed on evening walks. For hours, detectives moved through the rooms methodically, documenting anything that looked out of place, which, as it turned out, was a lot. Inside, the mansion felt frozen mid-life. Children's toys sat beside untouched laundry. Expensive furniture contrasted with cluttered countertops, leftover food, and half-finished drinks. The house looked lived in, but not in sync, as if two separate realities coexisted under the same roof. And the deeper investigators went, the more contradictions they found. In the basement, they discovered damaged surveillance equipment with pieces missing or intentionally destroyed. Hard drives had been removed, wires were cut. Some cameras worked, others didn't. It was a patchwork of surveillance and silence, exactly the way Hernandez had left it. Other discoveries added to the unease: a broken cell phone, ammunition tucked away in surprising places, a guest room that seemed abandoned in a hurry. The garage contained items that raised even more questions: clothing, receipts, and objects investigators believed linked Hernandez to the crime. Every room seemed to whisper a different part of the story, and none of it aligned with the clean suburban image the mansion projected from the outside. For Cheyenne, the aftermath was devastating. She watched the home she had built, the nursery she decorated, the kitchen where she cooked, the quiet backyard where her daughter played, transform overnight into a crime scene. Officers asked her questions she didn't know how to answer. Every drawer they opened, every box they carried out, felt like another layer of her life being peeled back in front of the world. By the time Hernandez was arrested, the mansion no longer felt like a home. It felt like evidence, like a place that had absorbed too much truth, too much fear, too many late-night decisions that now carried irreversible weight. The walls no longer protected him, they documented him. Long after Aaron Hernandez left the North Attleboro mansion for the last time, the house remained, silent, heavy, and stained by the story it had unwillingly witnessed. What had once been a symbol of arrival for a young NFL star became, almost overnight, a monument to a life that spiraled beyond repair. The property stood there quietly, but its presence tugged at the memories of everyone who knew what had happened behind its walls. In the months after Hernandez's conviction, the mansion became the subject of endless speculation. Reporters drove past slowly, cameras ready, hoping for a glimpse of the infamous home. Curious locals took detours just to see the place they had watched on national news. But for those who had once considered Hernandez a neighbor, the attention brought discomfort. The house had become a landmark, but not the kind anyone wanted. Eventually, the property went into foreclosure, shifting hands through legal disputes on unpaid debts and the financial fallout of Hernandez's unraveling life. Realtors faced a grim challenge. How do you present a mansion with a story so dark, so entangled with scandal, that it seemed to carry its own gravity? The listing price dropped. Potential buyers hesitated. Some came out of morbid curiosity, others out of hope they could erase its past with renovations and new furniture, but the energy of the home was hard to shake. Inside, the scars were not physical. Most evidence had been removed, repaired, repainted. Yet people who toured the house described a strange stillness, a heaviness in the air as though the home itself remembered. The basement, once the center of Hernandez's private world, felt the most haunting. Empty now, stripped of couches, smoke, and late-night voices, it held only echoes. Shadows pulled in corners that had once been crowded. The silence there felt colder. But perhaps the most lasting legacy of the mansion is the way it reframed the public's understanding of Hernandez's downfall. The house became a character in the story, not because it caused anything, but because it contained everything. His rise, his paranoia, his contradictions, his secrets. It was the place where two versions of Hernandez collided. The disciplined athlete adored by fans, and the troubled young man haunted by old ties and internal war. Today, the mansion stands as a reminder of a life that could not be saved by money, fame, talent, or square footage. A reminder that walls cannot keep out the past, nor silence the truth. Renovations may change its appearance, new owners may create new memories, but the story remains woven into its foundation. The house witnessed the collapse of a star, and in doing so, it became a cautionary monument, a symbol of how a life can look perfect from the outside while darkness grows quietly inside.